The morning mist still lingered over Lake Serenity, softening the outlines of the cabins and the still waters, when the wail of sirens tore through the quiet. I stood on my porch in a worn flannel shirt, clutching a steaming mug of coffee, squinting at the sound. 2 police cruisers rolled slowly down the gravel driveway, their lights cutting through the fog. The officers stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts, faces a mix of alert professionalism and confusion. I hadn't even opened my mouth to ask what was happening when a woman came storming toward me down the path, her blonde hair bouncing perfectly with each step of her march. "There he is. That's the man trespassing on private property," she yelled, her finger stabbing at me as if I had single-handedly plotted every crime in the county. Her voice carried that sharp, piercing quality that made it feel like even the birds were ducking for cover. "I told you on the phone, officers. This vagrant has been squatting here, parking wherever he wants, ignoring every HOA regulation we have." The lead officer, tall with flecks of gray in his hair, raised an eyebrow and glanced between us. "Sir, can you explain what you're doing on this property?" I took a deliberate sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone shift awkwardly. Then I set the mug down on the porch railing, calm as a lake in winter. "Officer, this is my property. In fact, I designed this neighborhood, including the house that the woman lives in. 3 weeks earlier, I had arrived at Lake Serenity seeking a much-needed break. 15 years of non-stop construction projects across the state had left me drained, and this retreat was meant to be a sanctuary. This community held deep personal significance. I had purchased the land in 2007 and spent 3 years meticulously planning everything: the curving roads that hugged the lake, the communal dock for residents' kayaks, the careful placement of each lot to optimize privacy and lake views. The vision had been simple: a place to escape the noise of city life, without sacrificing comfort or quality. The HOA was deliberately lenient, structured only enough to preserve property values and standards without becoming suffocating. I personally handpicked the original board members, residents who understood the philosophy behind the community. But that had been over a decade ago. Life pulled me elsewhere, managing larger projects in different states. My cabin had been largely empty, maintained by a property management company while I focused on work. This was my first extended stay in years. Trouble began almost immediately. On my second day back, while unloading groceries from my truck, I noticed a woman across the street staring at me, arms crossed, chin tilted. She looked every bit the part of someone preparing for battle. "Excuse me," she called sharply. "Do you know you're parked in violation of HOA Ordinance 7.3? Vehicles must be in designated driveways between p.m. and 6 a.m. I checked my watch. 2:00 p.m. My truck was in my own driveway. I kept my tone neutral. I wasn't aware of any issues with my parking. She stepped closer, phone in hand like it was a baton ready to strike. "I'm Jennifer Blackwood, president of the Lake Serenity HOA, and I'm just a resident enjoying my property," I replied, lifting another grocery bag. Her eyes narrowed. "I don't recognize you. How long have you lived here?" "I've owned this cabin for quite some time." "That's not what I asked," she snapped. "When did you last attend an HOA meeting? Do you get our newsletters? Are your dues current?" I continued unloading groceries, deliberate and calm. "Everything is handled through my management company. Is there a specific concern?" Jennifer flushed red. "The concern is that we have standards here. Outsiders like you disrupt our way of life. I'll be watching over the next few days." Her campaign intensified. First came the notes tucked under my windshield wiper, passive-aggressive as love letters. "Trash bins must be stored out of sight." I kept mine behind a fence. "Grass height exceeds HOA limits." I had mowed yesterday. "Unauthorized watercraft." I had a kayak rack installed years ago. Then came the in-person inspections. She would appear anytime I stepped outside, clipboard in hand, recording supposed violations with zeal. Deck chairs not approved by the architectural committee, bird feeders attracting wildlife, and even my truck's brand was too commercial. "Don't you have anything better to do?" I asked once as she photographed my mailbox. "Maintaining property values is everyone's responsibility," she declared with self-righteous fervor. If only she knew. If only she realized the committee she revered was my idea, that the community garden she passed every day was built on land I had donated. By the second week, Jennifer had gathered allies, newer residents who clung to her every word. They whispered and pointed as I drove past. One man, Harold, even jogged away when I waved. The absurdity peaked when she called an emergency HOA meeting specifically to discuss non-compliant residents. I didn't attend, but I learned about it later from Tom Morrison, an original board member still living nearby. "You should have seen her," Tom said over the phone, barely containing his laughter. "She had an entire PowerPoint about you, photos of your truck from every angle, a detailed timeline of your supposed violations, even a map highlighting your property in bright red, like you were patient zero of some epidemic." "Did anyone mention who I am?" I asked, half amused, half incredulous. "I started to, but then I remembered how much you value your privacy," Tom replied. "Figured I'd let it play out a bit longer. Besides, she wouldn't have listened anyway. She was already talking about calling the authorities if necessary. I should have seen it as a warning." Instead, I found myself laughing quietly. After years of navigating multi-million-dollar developments and corporate politics, Jennifer's petty little crusade was almost charming in its absurd simplicity. That fragile amusement ended on a Thursday morning. Jennifer decided to escalate beyond passive-aggressive notes and icy stares. I was sipping my coffee on the deck, watching the sunrise paint the lake in brilliant golds and soft pinks, when I heard her voice carried across the water. 911? "Yes, I need to report a trespasser. He's been squatting on private property for weeks, refuses to provide ID, and I fear for the safety of our community." I couldn't hear the dispatcher, but Jennifer's next words made her intentions painfully clear. "Yes, he's here right now. The address is 47 Lakeshore Drive. Send officers immediately. He seems unstable." Unstable? I almost choked on my coffee. The most unstable thing I'd done all morning was forget to brew a decaf option. 20 minutes later, the police arrived, and the scene unfolded exactly as it had that morning. Jennifer strutted toward the officers, triumphant in her imagined victory, while the lead officer tried to process the situation. "Sir," he said again, his tone polite but firm, "we're going to need to see identification and proof that you have a right to be on this property." I moved slowly, deliberately, handing over my wallet to avoid any misunderstandings. "Officer, my name is David Harper. I own this cabin. In fact, I developed this entire neighborhood back in 2010. Jennifer's laugh cut through the morning air, sharp and dismissive. "Oh, please? You expect us to believe that? David Harper, some rich developer living in Manhattan, probably. You're just a squatter with delusions of grandeur." I handed my license to the officer, then pulled out my phone. "Officer, I have digital copies of all the original development plans, permits, and deeds right here. Would you like to see them?" As I scrolled, showing blueprint after blueprint with my name and signature clearly visible, Jennifer's confidence began to falter. The second officer was already on his radio, running my information through their system. "I can also confirm," I continued, maintaining the calm tone that had carried me through Jennifer's antics, "that if you contact the county records office, they'll verify I not only own this property, but retain the master development rights for several common areas throughout Lake Serenity." The radio crackled. "Subject confirmed, David Harper, 62-year-old male, 47 Lakeshore Drive, Lake Serenity. No warrants, no issues. Property records confirm ownership." The lead officer's expression shifted from professional neutrality to barely concealed irritation, but not at me. He returned my license with a polite nod. "Mr. Harper, I apologize for the inconvenience. It appears there's been a misunderstanding?" Jennifer's voice rose an octave. "He's been violating HOA rules, parking wherever he wants, doesn't attend meetings." "Ma'am," the officer interrupted, his patience clearly thinning, "HOA violations are civil matters, not criminal ones. You called 911. Reporting a trespasser that constitutes false reporting." The color drained from Jennifer's face as the weight of the statement hit her. "I didn't mean, I thought," she stammered, Furthermore, the officer continued, his tone firm, you claimed the subject seemed unstable and that you feared for the safety of the community. Making false statements to emergency services is a serious offense. I watched as her carefully constructed world began to collapse. The small crowd of neighbors gathered around murmured quietly, phones already out, likely sharing the story across neighborhood social media. By that afternoon, news of Jennifer's blunder had spread through Lake Serenity like wildfire across dry brush. Tom Morrison called an emergency board meeting for that evening, and this time I decided to attend. The community center was packed, standing room only, buzzing with the kind of energy I remembered from the very first neighborhood meetings. Jennifer sat in the front row, conspicuously without her usual allies. Her posture was defensive now, arms wrapped around herself as though shielding from an invisible attack. Tom called the meeting to order, barely hiding his satisfaction. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to address this morning's false 911 call. But first, I think it's important for everyone to understand some history. David, would you mind? I stood facing the crowd, some familiar from the early days, many new faces who didn't know who I was. Thank you, Tom. For those unfamiliar with me, I'm David Harper. In 2007, I purchased 300 acres of undeveloped lakefront property. I spent 3 years planning and developing what would become Lake Serenity. I pulled up the original development plans on the projector. Every street, lot, and common area was carefully mapped, designed to balance privacy with neighborliness, natural beauty with modern convenience. The HOA bylaws had been written to preserve property values while avoiding the kind of oppressive oversight that plagues many communities. The room fell silent except for the hum of the projector. Jennifer shrank further into her seat. I kept only one property for myself, I continued. Lot 47, where I built a modest cabin. My work has often taken me out of state, so I haven't spent much time here over the years. But this place has always been special. It embodies what I believe a community should be. An older resident I didn't recognize raised her hand. Why didn't you speak up when Jennifer started harassing you? I smiled. Honestly, I wanted to see how the community would respond, whether the spirit we created had survived. Today, we have our answer. Tom took back the floor. Which brings us to the matter at hand. Jennifer, as HOA president, you filed a false police report against a homeowner, specifically, the founder of our community. The board has met in emergency session and made several decisions. Jennifer finally spoke. Though her voice lacked its usual authority. You can't just remove me without proper procedures. Actually, we can. Tom interrupted, holding up a document. Article 12. Section 4 of the bylaws written by Mr. Harper himself states that any board member who brings disrepute to the community or misuses their position for personal vendettas may be removed by unanimous vote of the remaining board. The vote was 5-0. The gavel came down with finality. Furthermore, Tom continued, the HOA will file a formal complaint with the Sheriff's Department regarding your false 911 call. You may face fines or penalties. Mr. Harper, as the affected party, retains the right to pursue civil action. Stood again. I have no interest in lawsuits. However, as the original developer, I retain certain easement rights around all properties for future infrastructure improvements. I've allowed homeowners to use and landscape these areas as they see fit, but given recent events, I will be enforcing these easements on Lot 23. I pulled up a property map showing Jennifer's house. This includes the 10-foot strip where you built your extended garden and the access path to the lake that you've been treating as private property. Jennifer's face turned from pale to bright red. You can't do that. I've maintained that area for 5 years. Actually, I can, and I will, I said calmly. My attorney will be in touch to restore these areas to their original state. The room erupted into chaos. Jennifer jumped to her feet, hair disheveled, voice cracking as she screamed about lawsuits and discrimination. But the crowd no longer supported her. The very people she had rallied were now seeing her for what she truly was, a petty tyrant who had overstepped her authority. 2 weeks later, I was back on my deck, enjoying a peaceful sunrise, when Tom stopped by with news. Thought you'd want to know. he said, accepting a cup of coffee. Jennifer was fined $500 for the false police report and must complete 40 hours of community service. I nodded, unsurprised. The sheriff's department had taken the matter seriously, especially after reviewing the 911 recording in which Jennifer claimed I was unstable and dangerous. There's more, Tom added, barely hiding his glee. She tried to organize a petition to reinstate herself to the board, but couldn't get a single signature. Harold actually crossed the street to avoid her yesterday, and the real estate sign went up on her lawn this morning. As if on cue, we heard a door slam in the distance. Jennifer emerged from her house, carrying boxes toward a moving truck that had seemingly appeared overnight. Even from across the neighborhood, her defeat was palpable. She avoided making eye contact with any of the neighbors, who were conspicuously finding reasons to linger in their front yards. She loaded the boxes with sharp, angry movements, pausing occasionally to glare in the direction of my cabin. At one point, she muttered something, probably complaints about injustice or persecution, but the morning breeze carried her words away before they could reach us. You know, Tom mused, sipping his coffee, she never did apologize. Did you expect her to? I asked. Not really. People like her never think they're wrong, even when reality proves otherwise. Jennifer slammed the truck's rear door with unnecessary force, the sound echoing across the lake like a final declaration of her frustration. She stomped back toward her house, presumably for more boxes, her face a mask of barely contained rage. A few neighbors had gathered now, pretending to water plants or check mail, while clearly watching the spectacle. Mrs. Chen from Lot 15 even had her phone out, probably updating the neighborhood Facebook page in real time. Jennifer returned, dragging a stubborn suitcase that seemed to catch on every small imperfection in the driveway. She yanked it with visible force, muttering words I'm sure were less than polite. When she finally reached the truck, she hefted the suitcase with such intensity that it bounced off the interior wall and nearly knocked her over on the rebound. There's something almost poetic about it, Tom observed. She spent so much energy trying to drive you out, and now she's the one leaving. The irony wasn't lost on me. In her quest to protect her so-called perfect kingdom, Jennifer had orchestrated her own downfall. The very rules and procedures she weaponized against others had been turned against her. As the morning wore on, the moving truck gradually filled. Jennifer had to stop several times, sitting on her porch steps with her head in her hands. Not a single neighbor offered assistance. The same people who had once hung on her every word now treated her as if she were invisible. By noon, the truck was fully loaded. Jennifer made one final trip into her house, emerging with a small box she cradled carefully. She surveyed the neighborhood one last time, her expression a complex mix of anger, sadness, and perhaps a hint of regret, if she were capable of self-reflection. She climbed into her car, started the engine, and began backing out. For a moment, I thought she might leave quietly. Then she stopped, rolled down the window, and shouted in my direction. "This isn't over, Harper. You'll regret this." Several neighbors laughed openly, Mrs. Chen undoubtedly recording now. Jennifer's face flushed even redder. She gunned the engine, nearly clipping her own mailbox, while the moving truck followed at a more sedate pace, its driver likely relieved to leave the drama behind. As her car disappeared around the bend, Tom raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. To Lake Serenity, may it return to the peaceful community it was meant to be. I clinked my mug against his, but my mind was already moving forward. Work awaited, the community garden needed expansion, the boat launch renovation was overdue, and perhaps it was finally time to build the walking trail I had envisioned years ago. But first, a small task: a modest bronze plaque at the neighborhood entrance reading, Lake Serenity, founded by David Harper, 2010. Not for vanity, but as a reminder that communities are built on respect, not rules, on cooperation, not confrontation, and that sometimes the best answer to petty tyranny is patient truth. Tom left after finishing his coffee, and I settled back into my chair to enjoy the calm. Across the lake, a heron stood motionless in the shallows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, nature's own sense of timing, its own form of justice. My phone buzzed with the text from my attorney. Easement enforcement letters sent. Mrs. Blackwood's lawyer is already calling about negotiations. Should I respond? I typed back a simple no. Jennifer had made her choices. Now she would face the consequences. The afternoon sun climbed higher, warming the deck and chasing away the last of the morning chill. Somewhere nearby, a boat motor hummed to life. Children's laughter drifted from the community beach, the sounds of a neighborhood reclaiming its peace. I closed my eyes and remembered why I had built this place, not for property values or prestige, but for moments like this. Simple contentment that no HOA regulation could improve upon. My phone rang again. Tom. David, you won't believe this. Just heard from the sheriff's office, they're adding another charge for Jennifer. She has a history of false reports in a previous neighborhood. This could mean jail time. How much? I asked, though sympathy was hard to muster. Up to 6 months if convicted, plus fines up to $5,000. Her lawyer's trying to plea it down, but the prosecutor seems determined to make an example. I thought of Jennifer, probably somewhere on the highway by now, fleeing the kingdom she had tried so hard to control. 6 months in jail, $5,000 in fines, moving expenses, loss of her board position, and the collapse of her reputation, all because she couldn't mind her own business. Thanks for letting me know, I said. You almost sound sorry for her, Tom teased. Almost, I admitted, but not quite. As I hung up, I noticed movement at Jennifer's former house. A young couple, accompanied by a real estate agent, was inspecting the property. Fresh starts all around. Across the lake, the heron struck, emerging with the fish wriggling in its beak. Swift, decisive, effective. Nature had handled its business. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't mind. Plans awaited, restoring the community to its original vision. But first, a few more minutes of peace. The couple at Jennifer's house examined the reclaimed easement garden, the agent explaining the recent neighborhood changes. I wondered if she would mention the dramatic exit of the previous owner. Probably not. Real estate agents focus on potential, not past drama. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from the county prosecutor's office. Mr. Harper, regarding the false report case against Miss Blackwood, given the evidence and her prior history, we are confident of a conviction. Minimum 90 days incarceration. $2,000 fine, 90 days. 3 months for Jennifer to reflect on how her need for control had cost her everything. I deleted the message and set my phone aside. The sun warmed my face. The lake sparkled like scattered diamonds. Children's laughter echoed across the shore. The community was healer, turning to what it was meant to be. Jennifer's story in Lake Serenity had ended the moment those handcuffs clicked. 90 days, $2,000, plus the sheriff's fine. Her scream, "This isn't fair," had echoed through the courthouse, a final testament to the consequences of petty tyranny.